The cataloging hall of Indrekvesh was kept at exactly 5 degrees Celsius. 837 kneeling impressions scarred the freezing black stone floor. Myril pinched her cuff, wondering how long the human representative from Earth could survive here. At exactly 0400, the Glassine Empire expected them to kneel, unaware that 31 years of quiet paperwork had already erased them from existence. Dr. Tamer Lekvanad's Halst stepped up to the dais. She rested her bare left palm flat against the freezing obsidian. She did not shiver. She tested the stone like a pianist testing a key. No heat, no chairs, no mercy in the stone. Myril was 24 years old. This was her first trip as a diplomatic aide. Her training back on Earth had not prepared her for the deep cold of this alien world. It had certainly not prepared her for the massive size of the room. The basalt chamber stretched 58 meters wide. The ceiling was lost in dark shadows far above them. The floor was polished like a black mirror. It was built so visitors had to watch themselves shrink as they walked toward the center. Every step made a sharp echo that bounced off the high walls. The 837 kneeling impressions were deep holes worn right into the rock. They had been ground down by the knees of defeated kings, broken leaders, and surrendered generals over 2,000 years. The edges of the holes were smooth. They looked like empty, hungry mouths waiting for the next meal. Tamer did not look down at the glass. She did not look at the holes. She was 50 years old. She wore a simple dark coat that seemed entirely too thin for the weather. Over her right shoulder hung a plain canvas bag. In her left hand, she held a battered steel thermos with a heavy brass collar. The metal had a small dent. It was shaped like a thumbprint, worn smooth over many long years of daily use. She set the thermos on the dark obsidian desk. The dent caught the harsh light from the ceiling. The steel was still warm to the touch, heating the cold air around it. She had timed even that. I thought I was walking in to watch Earth lose its diplomatic standing. I did not know I was walking into an execution. Stay close. Heavy metal doors hissed open behind them. The sound was like a sharp intake of breath. Senior pedagogue Atren Volker-Rossith entered the hall. His heavy boots struck the stone floor like hammers. He stood 2.4 meters tall. Thick, blue-black armor plates covered his broad back. The plates caught the cold light and seemed to glow faintly, like deep ocean ice. When he breathed, a low sound filled the massive room. It was a deep 38 hertz hum. Myril felt the sound in her teeth before she heard it in her ears. Her molars vibrated. The water in her eyes seemed to shake. The Crethon used that low hum on purpose. It made smaller species feel weak and sick in their stomachs. It was a physical weight. It was just another way to force control before a single word was ever spoken. High up in the gallery, 89 ambassadors sat in a wide circle. They watched in complete silence. They came from the recognized client worlds of the Concordat. They wore heavy robes of silk, woven wire, and spun glass. Some breathed different gases through clear masks. Some had multiple eyes that blinked out of order. They had all come to this freezing room to watch Earth learn its proper place. Atren did not greet Tamer. He did not even look at her. Instead, he unrolled a thick stack of yellow parchment. It was the pedagogical assessment of Earth, 43 pages of heavy, stiff paper. He cleared his throat. The low hum stopped, leaving a ringing silence behind. Humanity has held a seat for 71 years, Atren read. His voice boomed across the black glass, harsh and commanding. They have learned nothing of lasting use. Myril swallowed hard. Her breath made white clouds in the freezing air. Her toes were completely numb inside her boots. She looked over at her boss, desperately hoping to see a plan. Tamer was not listening to the giant alien. Myril frowned. She watched the older woman carefully. Tamer had her head turned slightly to the side. She was looking up at the high gallery. Specifically, she was watching the Silim Grand Archivist. The Silim were tall and slate gray. They moved with slow, careful grace. They had clear sacs on their throats. Those sacks flushed bright amber when they heard something they needed to record for history. It was an old, deep reflex. They were the great watchers of the galaxy. They lived for 300 years. They remembered every broken promise and every spoken lie. The Grand Archivist was looking right back at Tamar. His throat sacs were pale gray. Not a single drop of amber showed. He was not recording the pedagogue's words. Myriel pinched her left cuff between her thumb and ring finger. It was a bad habit she used when she was nervous. She did not know what the pale sacs meant. A cold knot formed in her stomach anyway. She felt sure no one else in the room understood it either. The other 88 ambassadors just watched HFY. Only Tamar and the old archivist knew the secret. HFY turned the pages. In year 30, Earth failed to provide proper tribute, he read. In year 42, Earth built ships without asking permission. Your culture is a long list of unfinished cruelties. He smiled. He had 3 rows of sharp jaws and they all smiled at the same time. The teeth were thin and bright. The Glassine Imperium will now teach you how to behave. He dropped the heavy parchment on the stone desk. The slap of paper echoed loudly off the walls. Then he pointed a long, heavy finger at the floor. He pointed right at the deepest kneeling stone in the exact center of the room. Step into the stone, HFY ordered. Stand still for 9 minutes. Do not speak. Lower your head. This will begin your Earth curriculum. He folded his massive arms across his wide chest. We have the afternoon, Doctor. Tamar looked down at the deep holes in the stone. Then she looked at her old thermos. She reached out with her bare hand and unscrewed the brass cap. The metal gave a sharp squeak in the quiet room. She poured a small cup of dark coffee. Steam rose from the black liquid in thick curls. It smelled of roasted beans and warm dirt, cutting right through the sterile cold of the hall. She took a slow sip. She swallowed, her throat moving gently. She lowered the cup and checked her watch. It was a simple silver watch with a worn brown leather band. She looked up at the giant alien. She looked at him the way a person watches a kettle, waiting for it to boil. There was no fear in her eyes. There was only patience. Senior pedagogue, Tamar said. She spoke in perfect Imperial Crethon. Her voice was flat and calm. Thank you for the reading. I have one fact to correct for the record. She did not take a single step toward the kneeling stone. At exactly 04:00 this morning, Tamar said, your Imperium ceased to exist. I came to tell you in person. Up in the high gallery, someone dropped a metal stylus. It fell through the air in a slow silver blur. It hit the stone floor with a sharp crack. The sound bounced off the walls. It hit the left wall, then the right. It died exactly 1.6 seconds later. Then total silence filled the hall. HFY blinked his small black eyes. His 3 jaws stopped moving. He stared at the small human woman. Then a harsh barking sound ripped from his chest. He threw his head back and laughed. A desperate lie, HFY said. His deep voice shook the floor beneath Myriel's boots. He turned his heavy head toward the ceiling. Chamber AI, file a formal charge against the human. Irreverent fabrication. Add another 10 minutes to her kneeling time. The Chamber AI controlled all the legal records in the building. It ran on old Concordat rules. It was supposed to reply in a fraction of a second with a soft, melodic chime. It always answered. Nothing happened. 5 seconds passed. Then 10 seconds. Myriel stopped breathing. The air in the room felt heavy and thick like water. The machine was not answering the pedagogue. The glowing lights on the walls did not change color. Tamar just stood there. She held her warm coffee and waited. 31 years earlier, it started in a small room in the city of Tbilisi. The year was 1999. It was raining outside. The air in that room smelled of old leather binding, wood glue, and hot lemon tea. It was the back room of a quiet shop called the Sleeping Atlas Bookbindery. Dust danced in the light from a small window that looked out onto the wet street. There were no weapons in that room. There were no warships in orbit waiting for a command. There were just 7 humans, a single heavy iron typewriter with sticky keys, and a tall stack of blank paper. Professor Eitan Brastovsky sat at the head of a scratched wooden table. He was 47 years old then. He had tired eyes and a thick gray beard. He kept bees in a small yard outside. He set a chipped mug of hot tea down on the wood. Tamar was just 19 years old. She was a young student with a sharp mind for old laws and hidden rules. She sat across from the professor and listened. "Empires do not live in the sky," Eitan told her that first night while the rain hit the glass. "They live in ledgers. They live in long treaties. They live in the rules they force the small worlds to follow." He tapped the wooden table with a thick, calloused finger. "If you take away the paperwork," Eitan said softly, "the throne is just a chair somebody forgot to sit in." The Glassine Imperium had ruled the galaxy for 2,400 years. They took what they wanted from the stars. They forced smaller worlds to kneel and pay heavy tribute, but they never checked their own math. They thought doing paperwork was beneath their royal dignity. That was their fatal mistake. The humans in the Bookbindery did not build a bomb to fight them. They built a ledger. They called the secret operation the Sleeping Atlas. It was a name that never appeared in any digital system anywhere in the world. They kept it strictly on paper, hidden in plain sight. 7 people started it. 7 quiet specialists who knew how to read the fine print. Rashid tracked the money. Margaret broke the codes. Cal held the line. Rashid El-Bashir was a forensic accountant. He found the missing numbers. He memorized the entire Crethon imperial budget. He had to keep it all in his head. Writing it down would trigger a Concordat alert and ruin everything. He held billions of credits of stolen wealth in his mind for years. It gave him terrible headaches, but he never forgot a single coin. Sister Margaret Vrooman was a nun before she became a codebreaker. She lived in a quiet convent with high stone walls. In the spring of 2109, she broke the main Crethon diplomatic cipher. She did it on a Wednesday morning before breakfast, sitting near a garden of white flowers with a pencil in her hand. Counselor Ifoma Adesanya was the lead lawyer. She spent 23 years filing quiet, tiny claims. She filed 1,640 motions. She hid them in 13 different galactic courts. They were so small, the massive empire never even noticed them slipping into the record. Captain Suyon Jaipark commanded 3 archival fleets. She disguised them as slow agricultural haulers. They moved paper from dead worlds to safe worlds. They flew right under the noses of the Imperial Guard. They never fired a single laser. Lieutenant Cal Iron River was the combat liaison. His job was to stop the military from acting too soon. He never authorized a kinetic strike. He stood down aggressive generals for 30 years to buy the team more time. They filed, they waited, they watched. 20 seconds had now passed in the freezing hall on Indrekvesh. The AI was still dead silent. Atren's low hum grew louder and much more angry. He slammed his huge fist against the black stone desk. The sound cracked like thunder in the cold room, making Myriel jump. "AI," Atren roared. His 3 jaws snapped open. "Confirm the charge, lock the heavy doors." Myriel grabbed the edge of her datapad. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the plastic screen. She looked down at the floor. The 837 dents seemed to stare back at her. They were old scars of broken pride. She wondered if she would leave a mark too. Tamar did not flinch when the giant alien hit the stone. She did not even blink. She reached into her canvas bag. The rough fabric made a dry sound in the tense quiet. She pulled out a thin stack of papers. It was just 9 loose pages. "They are not going to lock the doors," Tamar said. Atren bared his sharp teeth. You have no power here, human. You are nothing but a tiny bug in a very old house. You will kneel." "I am not angry," Tamar said. "I am just the closer." She stepped forward and set the first page on the black stone desk. Myrill leaned forward to see it. The paper was covered in tight, neat text. It was not human writing at all. "You thought you were the only ones watching," Tamar said. Her voice carried clearly through the cold air. "But you forgot to count the people who make your empire run." 30 seconds of AI silence passed. Up in the high gallery, the Essilum Grand Archivist leaned forward over the metal railing. He gripped the cold bar with long, gray fingers. His throat sacs were still pale. He was waiting for the exact right moment. Tamar laid down the second page, then the third. "We did not do this alone," Tamar told the pedagogue. "We just did the math. We found the ones you hurt. We found the ones you owed." She pointed a steady finger at the loose papers. 12 different species moved today," Tamar said. "They moved in perfect timing. None of them fired a single shot. They just opened their books." HFY stared down at the pages. His bright blue-black skin seemed to turn dull in the harsh light. 41 seconds passed. Then the chamber AI woke up. The sound was not loud. It was a soft, clear chime, like a silver spoon hitting a crystal glass. It cut straight through the heavy 38 Hz hum of the giant alien. "Request denied," the chamber AI said. The voice was smooth and calm. It did not use the hard, harsh words of the Empire. It spoke in standard trade English. "The Glassine Empire is not a recognized legal body at this time. Senior Pedagogue HFY Volkaraseth has no standing in this court." HFY stepped back. His heavy boots scraped against the black glass floor. His 3 jaws hung open. He looked at the glowing blue lights on the wall. He seemed to think the machine was broken. He hit the stone desk with his giant fist again. "I am the senior pedagogue," he shouted. His deep voice shook the room again. "I speak for the throne. Lock the doors right now. Arrest this human." "The throne is empty," the AI answered gently. "At 0400 today, the Imperial Charter was erased from the main Concordat record. You are a private citizen. You cannot give orders here." Myrill stood frozen. She pinched her left cuff so hard her fingers hurt. She finally understood why Tamar had brought the coffee. Tamar knew exactly what time the machine would update its records. The silence earlier was not a delay. It was the AI checking the math across 13 different galactic courts before it made a ruling. Tamar looked at the deep holes in the floor. "The AI just reclassified this room," she said. Her voice carried easily across the huge hall. "Those kneeling stones are no longer a sign of your pride. They are now recorded as 837 counts of crimes against smaller species." HFY stared at the holes. He looked like a man who had just watched his house burn down. "This is a trick," he said. His voice was lower now. It lacked the heavy, shaking power it had before. "You forged these papers. You are just humans. You do not have the reach to do this." "We did not do it alone," Tamar told him. "We just gave the other species a safe place to put their anger." She pointed to the stack of 9 pages on the black desk. She explained what they meant. She kept her words plain and flat. She did not brag. The Tetharok were a small, 4-armed species of traders. They kept the most perfect ledgers in the stars. They believed an unpaid debt was a sin against the dead. At 0400, they recalled 1.1 trillion credits in old imperial loans. They wanted every single coin back, all at once. The Daskai were a scattered people. They lived as refugees on 23 different worlds because the Empire had stolen their home planet centuries ago. At 0400, they filed 19,600 separate legal claims for their lost homes. They crashed the main banking system in less than 2 minutes. The Cephalanreth were strict religious oath keepers. They wore long white robes. They had 6 eyes but only ever kept 2 open at a time. At 0400, they officially canceled the 14 sacred oaths they had sworn to the emperor. That made him a false king under their deep law. Without their blessing, no imperial ship could safely travel through the religious space lanes. They read the law, they found the cracks, they kept the secret. HFY shook his heavy head. The Concordat will never accept this. We will send the fleet. We will burn your small worlds until you drop these claims. We will turn your cities into glass. You have no fleet to send, Tamar said. The Yulan merchant guilds froze 89% of your trade money 11 minutes ago. Your ships cannot buy fuel. Your soldiers cannot buy food. Up in the high gallery, a sudden bright light flashed. Myriel looked up. The Essilum Grand Archivist was standing. He gripped the metal rail with both long hands. His clear throat sacs were no longer pale gray. They were glowing with a bright, hot amber light. The color was so sharp it hurt Myriel's eyes. He was finally recording history. The old archivist took a deep breath. When he spoke, he did not use standard trade language. He did not use the imperial tongue. He spoke in Old Essilari. It was a language the empire had banned 600 years ago. The sound was like dry leaves blowing across hard stone. It was beautiful and sad. The chamber AI translated his words instantly for everyone else to hear. The Essilum confirmed the record, the AI translated softly. We have watched the Glassine Empire alter treaties for 2,000 years. We have kept the true copies hidden in the dark. Today we bring them into the light. The empire is a fraud. The debt is real. HFY took another step back. He bumped hard against the heavy stone desk. His translator chip gave a sharp, high whine. The old band language was confusing the tiny machine in his ear. You cannot do this, HFY whispered. The deep 38 Hz hum was completely gone from his chest. He was just a tall alien in an empty, cold room. Tamar reached into her canvas bag one last time. She pulled out a single sheet of blue paper. It had a bright, red wax seal at the bottom. This is the last piece, she said. We did not find this one. Your own people gave it to us. She slid the blue paper across the smooth black desk. It stopped right near the pedagogue's thick hand. At 03:51 today, Tamar read, the Crethon Homeworld Senate held a secret vote. They knew the debt claims were coming. They knew the money was gone. To save their own home planet from paying the bill, they voted to cut the emperor loose. She looked HFY right in his small, dark eyes. They voted 209-11 to dissolve the empire. You were fired 9 minutes before I even walked into this room. Myriel let out a slow, shaking breath. She felt the cold air hit the back of her throat. She looked at Tamar's left hand. The older woman was gently running her thumb over the small dent in her brass thermos. It was a tiny, simple motion. It grounded her before the storm broke. Then the 89 ambassadors moved. It started with the Tethoric delegate. He pushed his chair back. The metal legs scraped loudly on the floor. He stood up straight. He smoothed his heavy silk robes with all 4 of his hands. Then the Daskai representative stood. He held his head high. Then the Cephalonreth Oathkeeper stood, closing 4 of his eyes in a show of deep respect. Then the Corvellan stood up. Then the Anum. The sound of heavy fabric shifting filled the huge hall. It sounded like a strong wind blowing through a dry forest. One by one, every single ambassador in the gallery got to their feet. Myriel watched in awe. Her heart beat fast against her ribs. No one spoke a single word. No one made a sound. HFY looked up at them. He opened his 3 jaws to speak, but no words came out. His translator chip sparked and died with a quiet pop. A thin trail of white smoke drifted from his ear. His bottom jaw started to tremble. It clicked unevenly against his upper teeth. He looked very small. The 89 delegates bowed. They did not bow to Tamar. They did not bow to the kneeling stones. They turned their bodies slightly to the right. They bowed toward the empty space at the head of the gallery. It was the space where the imperial throne used to sit. They bowed to an empty chair. They bowed to an empire that was no longer there. Myriel realized the empty space had always been empty. Every person in this room except the Crethon had known it. They had just been waiting for someone brave enough to say it out loud. No weapons, no warships, no warning. Atren's hands shook. He looked at Tamar. He was a broken man. He was trapped on an alien world, stripped of his power, waiting to be arrested by his own people. The anger was gone. Only a deep, dark shock was left. "How long?" Atren asked. His voice cracked. It was a small, weak sound. "How long have you been doing this?" Tamar reached out and picked up her battered steel thermos. She screwed the brass cap back on. The metal squeaked tightly in the quiet room. She slid the heavy bag over her shoulder. She looked at the broken alien. She did not smile. She did not look happy. She just looked tired. "Pedagogue," Tamar said softly, "you ordered me to stand still for 9 minutes." She paused, letting the cold air settle. "We have been standing still for 31 years. She turned around and walked away. She walked straight across the long black mirror. Her boots made sharp, clean sounds on the glass. She did not look back at him. Atren stood entirely alone in the center of the huge floor. The chamber AI chimed once more. It softly announced that homeworld security forces were waiting for him outside the heavy metal doors. He had nowhere left to run. 6 weeks later, the air was warm and thick with the smell of sweet flowers. Myriel stood in a small dirt courtyard in the old part of Tbilisi. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. A dozen tin pots sat on the ground, filled with blooming purple lavender. The purple flowers moved gently in the soft wind. The courtyard sat right behind the sleeping Atlas Bookbinduri. It was the exact same building where the plan had started 31 years ago. The stone walls were old and covered in green vines. Professor Aiton Brastovsky sat in a worn wooden chair. He was 78 years old now. He wore a heavy brown wool sweater, even though it was warm outside. His beard was completely white. 3 glass jars of fresh honey sat on a small table near his feet. A hive of bees hummed softly in the corner of the yard. He held a single sheet of white paper. He was reading names aloud. Dorit Ben Halevy, Aiton read. His voice was rough like dry sand. 26 years old, killed in a transit crash outside a consulate in 2106. She filed 41 motions before she died. Myriel listened to the low hum of the bees. It was a good, peaceful sound. It was nothing like the heavy alien hum that had shaken her teeth in the cold chamber on that distant world. Kwame Asant Marwa, Aiton read next. Translator, poisoned in 2102 after feeding the Grand Archivist a banned text. He read 153 names. They were the humans who had died over 3 decades to make the math work. They did not die in big space battles. They died in quiet rooms. They died working late at night, slipping small pieces of paper into giant systems, moving numbers when no one was watching. Yusuf Demirhan, Aiton said, accountant. His heart gave out in a cafe down the street. He was 47. Tamar stood near a heavy wooden table in the center of the yard. She wore a soft gray shirt. She reached out and placed her bare left hand flat against the warm wood. She rested her palm there, feeling the heat of the evening sun trapped in the grain. She set her old thermos on the table right beside the list of names. The small dent in the steel caught the soft orange light of the setting sun. The coffee inside was still warm. She had timed even that too. Tamar picked up the paper and read the last 14 names herself. They were not human names. They were the Brunatalu auditors who had been murdered in 2071 for trying to count the Emperor's gold. When she finished, the Esilim Grand Archivist stepped forward out of the shadows. He had come to Earth for the first time in 3 centuries. He wore a simple gray cloak. His throat sacs glowed with a soft, steady amber light. He read the exact same 14 names again. He read them slowly and carefully. He read them in Old SciFi, the language that was no longer banned. The names were read, the book was closed, the kettle boiled. Myril pinched her left cuff between her thumb and ring finger. She looked around the quiet yard. She looked at the bees and the flowers. For the first time in 6 weeks, she finally understood what she was looking at. The empire was truly gone. The paper had won. The bees kept humming. No one told them to stop. Tamar turned and walked back through the open door of the old bookbindery. The smell of hot lemon tea drifted out into the yard. Inside the dark shop, a fat orange cat named Boris slept on a tall stack of old census records. A hot iron kettle began to hiss and steam on a small stove in the corner. At the front counter, an old binder named Atari reached out with a rough, ink-stained hand. He slid a fresh, blank leather ledger across the scratched wood to wait for the next job.